Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Curriculum Subcommittee on February 28th, 2023. And we have some good topics to talk about today. I'm looking forward to that. I want to welcome Dr. Grace Way for, she's our interim Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning. So thank you so much for joining us, Grace. Thank you for helping us out. And she will be with us part-time through the end of the year. Is that what we could say? So anyway, it's great. It's great to have you. You want to just say a word about your background? I know you've got an extensive background. Do you want to just tell us something?
Well, sure. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. So my parents were immigrants, and spent, went to school in Memphis and went to Memphis State University, now Memphis University. Got my bachelor's in electrical engineering and landed my first job at NASA in Maryland. And then, but I really didn't like it. I could go through the motions, but I wasn't really a great engineer in my mind. But I really wanted to be a teacher. So I went and got my master's in education at University of Maryland. And from there, my whole life came together. I got married, we moved, and I started a teaching career. And so one of the highlights of my career was opening a magnet school that's still in operation now in New London. That was an exciting adventure. And then my next big stint was 9 years as a principal in Westford. And that's where I was able to open a modular building and then move into a brand new building. And so that was, while their district was growing and doubling in size, I was able to really support that moving forward. My next stint was in Lowell, where I merged two smaller schools into a K-8. And I spent 8 years there before going to Framingham as their director of curriculum and instruction, Boston as one of their regional school superintendents. That was my last job before retiring in the summer. And now I'm working with you all on a part-time basis.
Oh, we're so glad to have you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I know you know me. We've met, Michelle and Gabe, because you've worked with them. I don't know if you've met Helen and Stephen yet. So Helen, you want to just say hello?
At our last subcommittee meeting, yes, but not in person.
Right. Yeah, I first of all, welcome and thank you for giving us your background. It really, it helps to understand things. I've been on the school committee for 30 years. I don't know if did I actually introduce myself last time? I may have. I don't remember.
I don't recall. Probably not. I think we jumped right into content.
I think we did too. So I've been on the committee for 30 years. I've seen a lot of different educational waves in different ways, from kids feeling good about themselves to rigorous education to kids feeling good about themselves, so it sort of goes up and down. I'm a social worker by training and worked at Children's in the psychiatry department. But I haven't done that since I had my first biological child. So it's, that's been and I've been on the curriculum subcommittee probably forever. It's the one committee I really like.
You can be our historian.
I have.
Yeah.
I have. That's why the math, when you started talking about math, Suzanne, I think I've been through two different math reviews, two different, at least, 5 different parent groups who have come, sort of upset about math not being right. So just for everybody's knowledge, devotion, now the Ridley, but when it was devotion, they were the math geniuses in that school. For some reason, that was a school that that everybody, but the reason probably is that most of the physicists and economists lived in the devotion area. Anyway, but yeah, that's just a little bit but math is always
nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you, Helen. Stephen, you want to say a word or two?
Sure. Hi, Grace. Nice to see you again. I've been on the school committee for 31 years. No, I'm just kidding. Just for 1 year. For 1.5 years. It's my first full term, and in real life, I work on international educational development. all over the place. And funnily enough, I'm working for the first time on engineering programs right now. So it's fun to hear about your background. I have not studied engineering. I was an English major. And I didn't know that you were part of this new NASA mafia that
Yeah.
Dr. Taylor is.
No, well,
Mhm.
it just is
What?
it's a big coincidence. He was in Texas and I was in Maryland. So yeah.
It is funny though, it must be good training ground somehow. So that's great. That's
Or it
great.
makes people go into education.
Well, there you go. There you go. Perhaps so. Perhaps so. Okay. So thank you. Thank you for doing that. The first order of business is to approve the minutes of January 17th. I will move the minutes. Do I have a second? Stephen?
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. Helen, how do you vote?
Yes.
Stephen?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So thank you for that. Well, now we have 3 topics we're going to dive into. And I believe the first one is we're going to look at the current trends at M-Class. Is that how the order of that? Okay, so you're already taking it away.
So we are starting our day, yes, with the overview of the fall and winter M-Class administration. And then I'll turn it over to Grace, who is going to talk about the work we've done so far on the child study teams and thinking about enrichment. Let's see. Oh, it's not showing the slideshow. Are we going to run it through as the slide? Can we do it in present mode? You're on mute. Sorry.
Is it not showing the slides or should I go back? I was having trouble making it slideshow.
Yeah, it wasn't showing the presentation mode, and the new data I added will need that size.
Is it in the original Google Doc, the PPT or the slides?
Yes, it's in
Okay.
the one. Yeah, I see you in it, and I see Suzanne in it. Yes.
Got it. All right, let me see if I can make this happen now. I'm out of practice since COVID, you know?
Just to let people know, I'll give them a little background, Michelle, that
Sure.
the test, the M-Class are given K-2, K1 and 2.
Correct.
Mid-year, at beginning of year, that's the BOY, mid-year MOY, and then the end of the year, which we don't have yet, because this was our first year. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. And also to just highlight the purpose of the M-Class. So the M-Class, originally we started looking at screeners that were mandated by the state, looking for a dyslexia screener. And so we looked at the state identified screeners, but as we started to learn more about the screeners, we learned we could actually learn more about our students. And that's how we landed with M-Class as our screener. And I want to make sure that we understand that the universal screener, it doesn't tell us if a student has a specific learning disability. What it tells us is if a student is at risk. And then it also gives us more information about other students to look at how, where are they progressing well? And if they're not at risk, what are supports they might need? And it also says, tells us when students are really strong in an area. So it's also going to be super helpful for us to use as a way to look at our instruction and consider where we need support and instruction and where we're doing really well. So if we look at the next slide. So I want to remind us that our main goal this year, though, when we set out to do this and do our implementation, was to get people to administer the assessment. And with the help of Kristen Gray and the literacy team, we have succeeded. So what you'll see is that this is a comparison of the first assessment to the second assessment. So you'll see BOY, which is the beginning of the year assessment, and MOY, which is the mid-year assessment. And what you'll see is that we tested pretty much the same number of students across the board, which is great. It means that we have 2 data points on every one of these students. You will notice that there's a small percentage of students that say not completed. And there are a couple of reasons behind that. Our English language learners at level 1 and level 2, we are assessing them constantly, and these are not the right skills to be assessing them on at this point in English. Then we have a subset of students who have already been diagnosed with a specific learning disability in reading. We already know that, so this screener does not provide that information to us that we don't already have. So we're going to move in to
So
the
we
next.
didn't, just to be clear, we did not test those children,
Correct.
which we shouldn't be. I mean, that's.
Correct. This, because if we go back to the purpose being to identify students who are going to have poor outcomes from reading instruction, we already know that. So it would be like repetitive.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but maybe we shouldn't have not complete, but rather not appropriate for testing or something.
Well, so a couple of things. We load all of our students directly from Aspen through a system every night, and it updates. And we don't want to remove those students from the system, because if you'll notice, not complete 16% versus 12%, we've had some EL students that we added to assessment this year. In addition, we also use some other Amplify materials, and so we can't stop certain students from being loaded at night. So it's just, this is a function of the system that's pre-built.
And what it says, the not complete, it has to say not complete, because that's not true. It's not that they're not complete. We never tested them.
Correct, but they do not have a complete file.
Okay.
So,
all right. I'm
yeah.
done. I'm done.
No, it's a reasonable question. Absolutely.
So Helen, they have had other testing, they just haven't had this testing.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And they've had other access to other programs within Amplify, because Amplify is the platform that we use.
Okay. All right. I'm done. Never mind.
No, it's totally fine. Because so as we look at this, so what I want to do is I want to take you a little bit, I want to have you experience what teachers experience with this data. So I'm going to take you through the next couple of slides, and then I'm going to give you a chance to try it out. So something that we noticed when we received this data back, this is the composite score. So what this graph shows is how a student performs overall. It's the complete score of their performance. And what you'll notice is at the beginning of the year in kindergarten, we had certain outcomes. So we had 77% that were 17% that were well below benchmark, which was 77 students. We had 13% that were below benchmark, which was 60 students. But then we had 101 students and 214 students that are either at and above the benchmark. However, you'll notice I circled this because what we saw in the second assessment was we actually increased the number of students who were below and well below benchmark. And that's something we're going to dig into as we go through this presentation, because we need to look at why. And we need to look at how in our instruction, where in our instruction do we need to do something in a different fashion to get to moving that line in the other direction. However, what you'll also notice in grade 1 and grade 2 is we stayed pretty static. So we didn't increase greatly the number of students below and well below benchmark, but we also didn't increase in the students who are at and above benchmark. And I will tie this to the dyslexia screener shortly. So if we move to the next slide. So I wanted to also show you, though, we have lots of celebrations in this data. So what the data does is it breaks apart into subtests, and I will show you an entire grade's worth of subtests in a moment, but I just pulled one specific subtest to show that in grades 1 and 2, our word reading, what you're going to see is that we've increased our performance, which means what we're doing in the classroom is moving students. We haven't seen a great increase in grade 1, but we have seen a slight increase. What we've seen in grade 2, though, is that we are moving more students to well above. I want to also let you know that that green line that's hashed, it means that students tested out. So the test, I'm not going to call it self-corrects, but it self-monitors how students are doing. So if a student is either struggling or rocking it out in a particular area, it cuts them off because there's no need to frustrate a student and there's no need to continue to test something that we already know they've reached a benchmark. Yeah, Helen.
So why doesn't it just move up into the blue?
That's a really good question. What happens is it may determine that the student is at grade level, but sometimes that blue is the system bumping them to the next grade level. And what it may have said was, it's a good place to stop. They are completely at benchmark. We're not going to take them further, but we're going to shut the test down. And it really depends on how students answer and in particular ways. The other thing I also just want to highlight before we go to the next slide.
Wait, I'm sorry, Michelle. I didn't
sorry.
understand that answer. So if the test shuts down,
Mhm.
if it's really clear where they rank, either if they're really struggling with the test or if they really rock the test.
Correct.
But that doesn't show up either in the red or the blue because they either
Not in
fall-
this one.
Not in
Not-
this one.
Not in this one, right? I just wanted to show this as
Okay.
a example of an area where we're seeing growth. Yep,
So
you'll see in a moment.
when we have the comparisons, though,
Mhm,
that's how it functions outside of our own population as well.
mhm.
Huh, okay, thanks.
So yes, absolutely. That's a really good question. And one other thing that I want to point out as before we move into the next piece of data, because that's where you're going to dig in, is each time of the year, specific subtests are more important than other subtests. So for instance, at this point of the year in kindergarten, the subtests around phonemic awareness are significantly weighted more important than other subtests. For instance, like word reading, because students need that phonemic awareness. It is the foundation of the reading program. So as we do that, as we go through data, you're going to see that sometimes the data shifts in terms of what will make a student on or below benchmark. Suzanne, yeah.
Yeah, so Michelle, does that mean in the composite that we saw at the beginning that it has weighted test subscores? Okay.
Correct. And as we move into the next slide, we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that. Absolutely. So I'm going to give you a chance to do some digging. So let's move into the next slide. So I hope you can see this. Can you see this, the data? Grace, is there any way for you to just increase your screen or no? You may not be able to.
Because it's sharing, I don't think I can. I can
okay.
go in and
Betsy, I just sent you a copy of this just before the meeting, so maybe she can send it to the three of you so you can look at this on its own. I'm going to tell you what this is, and I'm going to talk to you about how we would walk through this data with the teachers. So can you just put your thumb up if you're good if you can see what we're talking about?
Actually, just so people know, we can make it bigger ourselves.
Oh, yes, you can. Sorry.
And I just did that. You're welcome.
How'd you do that?
Oh, I did it. Oh, yeah, I can move it up and down. Okay. If you go to view options, and usually it's at 100%, go to 150 or 200%,
okay.
depending on your eyesight.
Yeah. Oh, that's too big. Okay. Got it.
This is why I go nowhere now without glasses in every pocket.
Okay, thank you. That was easy.
All right. So what you see here, so these are our kindergarten scores for the entire district. And from the top to the bottom, I'll just tell you what you're looking at. So at the top, you're looking at composite scores. And as we already know from the first slide, our composite scores, we have moved more students into below and well below. I don't know that when I say we have moved, I want to just hold on to the fact that this is our responsibility as a whole district.
So one question, just before you go on, because we know that we have a huge churn factor that happens in the schools. Are we testing the same kids in the BOI and the MOI? Or are there more different kids? Maybe the same
different number of the different students is very negligible.
Really?
Very negligible.
We had a lot of move-ins after October.
But remember that we finished this first assessment October 27th, and we finished the second assessment January 27th.
Yeah.
So after October 1st, we still captured multiple students. In addition, as students came in, we encouraged teachers to give this, because one of the nice things about this assessment is if you have any concerns about a student's particular outcome, you can do certain subtests again. Like if you think they had a bad day or they didn't quite understand the direction you were giving, you can give the subtest again.
Yeah, I get all that. I just, well, I sort of question a little bit, because I do know, especially in the younger grades, a lot of kids come in, and some kids leave, so it's both.
Right, but I think this tells a reasonable story about the district and a
That's
reasonable
fine.
story about
That's
the
fine.
classroom.
Okay,
And
as long
that's
as-
really the focus we want to hold on to. Gabe, were you going to say anything?
Yeah, I think another thing that's really important is that when we see the teacher's like class dashboard, which will come later, they will see like, oh, this student had one test administered because they entered late, or this student is no longer in my class because they've left. And so like what Michelle said earlier about it being dynamic is when a student leaves, like we can remove them from the data. And so it really is an accurate live representation from the time of testing. And we have much more flexibility than we've ever had.
Okay.
Yeah, and this data is 2 hours old, because I had a change of heart about 2 hours ago about finding some better ways to approach the visual. So yeah, and I think, Gabe, thank you, because I forgot that I just said it was dynamic and that every night it updates with students. Suzanne and Stephen, do you have questions around this particular set of data? Or can we?
Yeah, just a clarification.
Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead, Stephen.
Just clarification, this is probably really obvious, but I'm assuming that the baseline changes from the BOI to MOI, that there's
The expectation? Mhm.
the growth of red doesn't necessarily indicate regression, but
Correct.
indicates, okay, thank you.
It's time of year. So where should you be at any time of year?
Thank you very much.
So
That's my question. Thank you.
Yep. And Suzanne, did you have a question?
Well, no, I was going to kind of make that same comment that the criteria is the test may be the same, it may be repeated, but in fact, we have different expectations, because when you first come into kindergarten, we don't really expect too much of you yet, although you may have some of those skills, obviously. And then the other thing, again, just to Helen's point, is that we're looking at trends right now. So it's the overall, and individual results are given to teachers, so they can look at each student separately.
Absolutely. And
That's not what we're doing
showing-
right now. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Thank you for asking. And I will show you that level of data shortly, just so you can see how far a teacher can dig in, because there's a lot of really great tools for us here. So the first thing I want to do is just run down what each subtest is, and then just ask you some questions. It's the same way we would take teachers through this process, so we can talk about it, because I know that on March, I think the March 30th school committee meeting is a broader presentation about M-Class. And what I want to make sure is that we know what your questions are in terms of what we cover in March, at the end of March. So as you look at this, so you'll see composite score. So that's the overall score for all of the data. And then as you kind of go down the side, you're going to see that there's some very specific assessment names. And I just want to tell you what each one does, so that you can just think about this as you look at the data. So letter name fluency is exactly what it is. Can you name letters? It's almost like doing a math times table test. Phonemic awareness. So that's going to assess students' ability to fluently segment 2 to 6 phenome words in their individual phonemes. So, I mean, words into their individual phonemes. So like, many of you talk about, have heard, with foundations like apple, like segmenting the word down to its smallest parts. Letter sounds, it is what it is. What does the sound of the letter make? And then decoding. So that's frequently, there are 2 areas that's assessed in this. We have nonsense words. So to see if students can use their understanding of sounds and the letters themselves to sound out the word. And then there are real words, and they're assessed on that. Decoding is exactly as decoding always is. It's about reading sentences and being able to put them together aloud. And then word reading, and then RAN. And the RAN is the rapid naming assessment. And just to give you a high level indicator, the idea of whether a student is at risk for a disability comes together if both the composite score and the RAND scores are below and well below, and there are certain cutoffs that create that score. So what I'm going to ask you to do, just to take a high level, is where in this data, where do you see us have, and this is kindergarten, by the way, this is all of our kindergarten data. Where do you see the strengths in our data? Where are we showing that we're progressing with students and they're going to be where they need to be at this point in the year? And you can just call out, I'm not. And we would call this celebrations with teachers. Where do we see celebrations in our data?
So in decoding, which it wasn't even, I take it wasn't, no, it was tested. So decoding, we have, well, help me out, Michelle. It wasn't tested at the beginning of the year. Is that why that yellow is?
No, what that is at the beginning of the year is that says that many students were below benchmark.
Okay.
Yellow is below benchmark. I should have left that key on here. So keep going with what you were starting.
Well, what I want to say as a success is that we now had 30% of our students actually decoding by the end of the year.
At the middle of the year.
I'm sorry, middle of the year.
And it's actually more than 30 because it's the green and the blue added together. So,
right, so it's 55%.
So where we only had 27% of our students at the beginning of the year, and we had none decoding beyond, well above the benchmark, we now have 55% of our students at or above the benchmark. So that's a big improvement, especially because, as Stephen said, the expectation level has risen.
And then you see that again in word reading, right? That follows through. Again, a big change there. Letter sounds, a big growth there. Letter names, I guess you can't get better than just knowing all the letter names. So it would be hard to be above grade level in that.
Correct. Yep. Fair enough. Yep. Sure. So my question is, there are two that haven't come up, and I know I haven't given the other two a chance yet, but looking at our RAND score, which is the second to bottom, and our risk indicator. So if you remember, I said that our risk indicator is based on the RAND and the composite score. In October, we had 17 students, 4%, who were shown on this assessment as being at risk for potentially a specific learning disability related to reading. We have knocked that down to 1% at this point in the year, which is, and my glasses aren't good enough. Can somebody tell me how many students that is? Five students. So we went from 17 to 5 students. That is huge. And that is the purpose of why the state deemed it important to require school districts to have a dyslexia screener. And I will explain why momentarily about the instruction that's related. Helen, did you have a question?
I do.
Sure.
So this risk indicator actually seems low, because what is the percentage of kids who have reading disabilities?
So that's a really good question. And I think we've talked a little bit about it. And I noticed in one of the presentations we did, we may have missed a misconception that came out. So I think our current numbers, I looked yesterday, we're at about 18% students with disabilities across the district. Not every one of those disabilities is a reading disability.
Of course. So how many are dyslexic?
Of that group. So I think the last check was about 4% of the total group of students with learning who have a disability were specifically dyslexic. but I can look at that and
Is
get
that
back.
true for the country? I mean, isn't there? I thought it
No,
was
the
higher.
estimates for dyslexia are between 5 and 20%.
Right, between 5, I'm sorry, you're right, Stephen, I messed that up.
That's
okay.
Of the 18%, that's what it was,
Oh, I
of
see.
the 18% of students that have a disability, 20% fall within a reading dyslexia. Sorry, thank you. So yeah, so I just want to quickly just say,
No, my point being that, so, I mean, yes, I agree, it's a very low percentage, but it's kindergarten, smart kids who have dyslexia can ace this. I would
and
imagine.
this is why we're required to do this every year, 3 times a year through grade 2.
Okay,
So that we don't, it's exactly why, because we
but I
have,
wouldn't highlight this as, I mean, it's good, but I wonder about this.
so
Well,
what I want to,
I would say, like, I think word reading is definitely cause for celebration. I mean, that the growth in the green and the blue is very encouraging, and that's really wonderful. But to me, in addition to that, it needs to be pointed out that the growth of the red in decoding and phonemic awareness is very alarming, and it also corresponds with statistics around reading deficiencies, which, like we said, dyslexia specifically, the upper range of estimates are around 20%. That actually exceeds the upper range of the dyslexia estimate. That's about 22%, right? So that's where that gap is generated, right?
correct, and
Okay.
right. And I agree with you. And it's like you were my plant, because that's the second half of this. So
You know what I'm going to say.
we begin with students, we begin with teachers talking about the celebrations, what's going well. And we frequently ask them, where in your instruction are you providing the support for the areas that are going up? How does that show up in your classroom? The second half is, so we have some areas that show challenge. And Stephen, you pointed that out, right? We have areas that currently are not demonstrating what we want them to demonstrate. And what we have to do is go back to our tier 1 instruction and ask teachers. Now, this is all 452 students. This is not specific to a 20 student classroom or an 18 student classroom. What we would do next is say, let's hone in to those specific areas and talk about what does current instruction look like, and looking at where these gaps are, what do we need to do differently, and how do we support that? And part of the support is the Office of Teaching and Learning. What do we do differently? Is it helping teachers find time for a double dose? Is it helping teachers with their materials? Do they need more support around Heggerty and foundations specifically? One of the things that we did find in our data, and I want to preface this with saying that this is the first year that we've implemented Heggerty. So it's a new experience for our teachers and for our students. So what we found was we looked at some classrooms where we know they have been able to do Heggerty 5 times a week. Those students were seeing the movement. We've looked at some classrooms where Heggerty can't, just timing wise, they're struggling to put Heggerty in 5 times a week. We can see some correspondence to student performance and the amount of times they are getting the instruction. So with our coaches and specialists, we're working with individual classroom teachers to increase that phonemic awareness instruction and the phonics instruction, both. So what this is we use this to create a plan to mitigate those items that you're talking about, those specific skills. And I want to show you how much data teachers get at this point. Before we move into, so if you look at this, so this is a classroom summary. This is one classroom, and you'll notice 16 out of 23 students were assessed. I went back to this classroom. This classroom is does have a high number of EL students in it who were at level 1 and 2, so they weren't assessed. It just doesn't make sense. They might be assessed later in the year. What you can see here, though, is the summary for a particular classroom around specific skills. So we can see that in the composite scores, many students in this classroom are at or above, but we have 4 students who are below and well below benchmark. Then we can look a little bit more closely about where are students struggling. And so when we take that, the teacher can look here, and which skill do you think we would start by honing in on?
Letter sounds
I have a different.
or phonemic awareness and
Right. So we would look at phonemic awareness very specifically. And because we have 9 students.
9 students, right.
Which is more than half of the students that were assessed in this classroom. So if you go to the next slide, this is the beauty of this tool. So what we see here is a little more specifics about where a student is at. So if you look at the beginning of the year, 9/28, so this teacher got started really early, which was great, 9/28/22, the student scored a 2. Which is really low, and they were below benchmark. They weren't well below benchmark. Well below benchmark when I looked at this was a 0. By the middle of the year, they were at benchmark. They scored a 30. The goal was 29. If you look up at the graph, this is really the exciting part. So this is where a little bit of your math experience comes in. What do you notice about the slope of the line on the graph? What do you see there? Do you see a sharp slope? Do you see a flat slope? Do you see a reasonable rising slope?
it's a huge slope from September to December, and it sort of is a lesser slope going to March.
Good. So let me explain this to you. The benchmark at March says if you continue your instruction the way you're at, this student will score 44 at March. What's really nice about it is if you notice, the 44 is within the benchmark. It's in the green zone. That is the target. The system will set a target for students that says, how much instruction do they need? What you will also notice is that the slope is like a regular hill here. It's not steep, it's not flat. So what it is saying is, as a trajectory for this student, if they continue to engage in the instruction you're giving and perform as they have, they will make the benchmark by the next assessment because they will be at the green zone. We have students in certain areas that have a very sharp slope. And the reason this is good and useful is it will help teachers be able to group students and understand how much intervention do they need? Do they need general tier 1 instruction? Do they need a double dose of instruction? So questions about this and the use of this, or comments?
Well,
Suzanne.
Yeah, Michelle, can you just briefly, I know because we're short on time, as always, just how do teachers have an opportunity to go through this, and who do they do that with?
Great question. So we had this really good opportunity this year, and we determined it last year, and this year was sort of a pilot. When we knew this was coming up, we also knew that, for example, in 3rd grade, we had a new science unit. So at the end of last year, we worked with all the principals and said, we're going to ask for 3 of your faculty meetings to be designated to OTL and OSS for PD. And what we did was we very intentionally scheduled that all 3 of those dates fell at the end of the assessment window for M class. And so all K2 teachers, anybody in special ed that works in the K2 classrooms, paraprofessionals who also supported the implementation, all attended at their school level a data meeting. And Kristen Gray, and with the help of Matt Dubois, and Kristen Gray, Matt Dubois, me, and some other people got together well in advance and developed the professional development that was provided at each school. And we had the reading specialists and coaches practice with us and then go out and do it at their schools. And so it was a very intentional effort to do that. It was the first time for a lot of people in the district. Data like this is very new, and this is a new experience. So we kept it at the high level of celebrations, areas for concern, and sort of coming to that plan of what happens next at the classroom level. That our intention is for that practice to grow and for us to maintain these data meetings on a regular basis.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks. A couple of questions. Michelle, are we seeing any oral reading fluency scores coming off of these assessments?
Oh, so yes, we are. I just didn't pull specifically, and that is more the second and for the first and second grade. So that's the other thing that I didn't mention is some of the subtests stay on or come off depending on the time of the year and the grade level. And we also made an intentional decision not to do the spelling test because the administration of it didn't give us enough data, and the administration of it was it's very difficult to do. It just didn't make sense, and it is not one of the required tests to come to the composite.
Okay. The other thing is, so can you go back a couple of slides to the slide where we spent a long time? Yeah. So
it's one way to describe it.
to the slide.
The slide.
So I appreciate you letting us do a deep dive on this. It's also kind of my nightmare slide. I appreciate you talking about increasing time for Haggerty as a potential response to this, but I think we also have to seriously consider that Haggerty is a Band-Aid for something like this, that it's not just the application of additional Haggerty to remedy gaps in phonemic awareness and decoding, but that there might be a root curricular problem that's causing the growth of gaps in kindergarten in these areas. That's caused by some of the curriculum that we're continuing to implement, and specifically the F&P and Calkins products that we continue to use. I've been hearing how we've continued to purchase Calkins products in our primary grades, even as recently as the past few months.
Yep. Can I clarify those Calkins products though, before we get sort of into a rabbit hole?
Absolutely.
Those products are not Calkins products for the Calkins units. I want to make sure, I want to be careful because I understand the research that is bubbling up around the Lucy Calkins program itself. As one of the pieces, and I want to just also make sure I share that the Haggerty is an example of one mitigation strategy. It is not the only. The Calkins materials that have been purchased are actually decodable books that she edited. They are not being used as part of the Calkins program. And I also want to make sure that the school committee knows that we had a process and included the teachers in the purchase of that. So we brought the 3 sets of decodable materials to the teachers and said, here are the 3 sets. Here's the lens we used. Which ones do you think belong in your classrooms? And overwhelmingly, the ones that were edited by Calkins were the top choice because they were the most inclusive, and they had, for our student body. So we didn't purchase them as part of the Calkins units to encourage people to continue to implement.
I hear you, and I appreciate and actually respect the processes that you and Leslie had set up previously to make sure that purchases are really inclusive of teacher opinion. But I think that Calkins has done so much to leave us legitimately skeptical of whether resources she even edits embodies her educational philosophies, which I think we need to be really skeptical of right now, because I think we have good cause to be skeptical of whether they embody some ideas that are being rightly questioned right now. So I guess my only point, I don't.
Yeah, I just want to ask a clarifying question when you're finished. Yeah.
I guess all I really mean to say by this, Michelle, is that I think a literacy curriculum review is really a great idea because it takes a look at the root causes of some of these issues. And I just wouldn't want our solution to the growth of those red zones to be the application of some specific recently purchased curricular modules, but rather to take a deeper look at our more holistic approach to our pedagogy, our content, our scope and sequence, our overall curricular approach to how we're teaching literacy at the earliest grades, to see if there isn't a problem, because I remain concerned that there may be.
No, I appreciate that. And I just, the only clarifying question or thing that I just want to throw out there about the materials is I hear your concern about Lucy Calkins. I absolutely do. And I respect the concern. You know, we want the best for our students. And I want to make sure that people, and this is a conversation that can go offline, but that people understand that when we purchase things like a decodable, that's a book that has, it's completely agnostic of anything else, because it's a way to have students practice decoding words. I mean, it is exactly what it says. So
the decodables are matched to the program. So if you're working on SH sounds, there's going to be words in the book that are SH. So has nothing to do with, you know, the Calkins program. It's actually part of having children practice and apply the learning that they're doing with the decoding.
Yeah, I know. My mother was a kindergarten teacher and a pre-K teacher. She sent me the decodables that she used as well. I do think, though, that a decodable is not a decodable, and you can still have educational philosophies in something as seemingly simple as a decodable that are still not evidence aligned, and they can be damaging nevertheless, even though they seem like they embody very simple principles. And I think Lucy Calkins deserves a lot of skepticism at this point, even if she's producing something that's not aligned with units of study or units of reading or anything like that.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to show my ignorance. I'm sorry, Steve, have you finished?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to show my ignorance. Is the decodable like the run, spot, run, and stupid books, so to speak?
Well, they're not novels, though. They don't have a lot of content.
Why?
They're practice.
Yeah.
They're practice, and they tend to show patterns, and so they
Yeah,
might
I
have,
remember I used it when I was a
well,
kid.
so see, Jane Run is more sight. These are more sounding out. They're more based for phonics and phonemic awareness,
So
however.
it really has nothing to do with the story or anything.
Well, they try to make it a little bit, but
Right.
it's not much of a story. I mean, Matt is on the cat is on the mat would be a really simple decodable, and there could be a whole story about it. It's not particularly interesting, but it's good practice.
Yeah, but okay.
Yeah.
I guess my question is there stuff out there that's more interesting for kids so they want to read it?
This is only like this, the decodables might be like a few minutes that students spend practicing every day. It's not their reading program. It's just one part of their day.
Okay.
It's
All
supposed
right.
to be like,
That's the case, because when I
very
saw
short.
it before, it wasn't, but that's
No.
good.
I think a good distinction is, like, if you're a musician, right, you still have to practice scales while you practice your piece that you're going to do at a recital, right? A basketball player is going to practice free throws. Like, these are that level where you're breaking down a very specific piece to practice for a little while.
And again, the goal is to move them along. So
Yeah.
hopefully they're not stuck in decodables. They're
Yeah.
getting to something more
Oh,
interesting.
no. And not every student, I mean, like, not every single student is exposed to the it needs the decodables. It's about, like Gabe said, it's the practice. So this is helping teachers, this data helps teachers determine who needs to be in those additional practices. If you need more, like Gabe always talks about at bats, how many times do you get to try? We want more at bats around those letter sounds and those blends, etc. We have the opportunity to give students these particular books so that they can practice.
So I'm going to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we really do have a hard stop at about 5:50, even though we said 5:30, but because we have other meetings coming up. So what I want to say is that I'm going to let you finish this, Michelle, and then we're going to move on. But I do want to say that to Stephen, that this isn't a literacy review. This is to let us know, what we've done this year to give us more data to understand that this will be part of a literacy review. It isn't done. It's, as you know, it's ongoing. And so we hear your concerns, and we know the literature. We're following it just as you are. And so this is a new effort for Brookline to actually have some data to figure out. And again, it's not that every child has to be reading well at the end of kindergarten. I don't think we're saying that either. At least I hope we're not. That's my bias. But to see where children are and how to help them progress.
Right.
And thanks, Michelle. I appreciate it and support
I
that.
know.
You know that I have a lot of passion about this issue, and I just mean to be supportive. I hope I'm not being too difficult.
No. We need to, I think we are all trying to do the best for our students. And I also, I think just to remind the group that like one of the things that I think Leslie left at her parting words was, this takes time, and any shift will take time. So even if we do a review, it's not immediate that we have something new in place. So I respect that. And I think
and to be clear,
yeah.
I am never pushing you to go faster.
I'm
only
I appreciate
pushing,
that too.
I really am not. I'm only pushing for a root cause analysis of the literacy struggles that the data are now demonstrating to us.
Well, and I think it's important now that we have, as Suzanne said, we have the data, we are beginning to get data, we are learning things about this assessment for ourselves as well, just how it provides. And really, we also have the ability to work at the classroom level and support people with the information we have from the data. So I am gonna leave us with that, but like I said, feel free to send us any questions that you continue to have, because I want to keep the conversation open, especially around this and literacy.
So just when is the next?
So no, great question. So I think our window is the end of May. And what I will tell you is we need to adjust the windows next year because we were a little bit overzealous in getting it started and we may want to push kindergarten a little bit later.
Mm-hmm. Kindergarten especially.
Yeah, it's hard at the beginning of the year. You're trying to set up routines and you're just trying to get the kids to know what they're supposed to do, what school
Correct.
is. So,
but we did hit our goal because everybody took it.
And who did the testing? Just a quick, was it the classroom teacher and the specialist and the coach? I mean, did everybody jump in and help?
Absolutely. Every teacher has a specialist as a partner, has a buddy teacher. And so it's a slow release for teachers to eventually do most of their class on their own, but we would not do that this year. It's a joint effort. Okay. Lots of people are engaging.
So I just want to thank Michelle because this is, judging from the implementation in terms of participation, student participation, and also teachers using the data for the very first time has gone exceedingly well. And so thank you, Michelle, for all of your hard work in getting this implemented. I also want to just make sure we're clear that it's 20% of students with disabilities potentially have dyslexia, not 20% of our students. And so I just want to make sure that we're not conflating the two to the public, especially that we're really clear that we're talking about 20% of 20%.
Yes, but what we should be doing, excuse me. Can I?
Go ahead.
I think when you're talking about this, it's important to talk about national levels of dyslexia, because I'm sure there is a number, whether it's 5% of the population has dyslexia, 2%, whatever percent it is of the population, that's what's important. The 20% of kids who are,
The other thing I think that's really important about all of this getting started is that this data system is our only formative assessment that we actually use district-wide. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, it's a start to something to actually a comprehensive assessment system. It doesn't have to be complex or take a really long time, but we really have no standard aligned way of knowing whether or not our students are on grade level. That's one comment. The second comment I have is that I am from places for the last, since 2005, where the red on these bar graphs is enormous. And so the fact that you're like mid-year, we're looking at a mid-year result, has green and blue on it, like, and small amounts of red. So, you know, Brookline is doing a great job. Parents are doing a great job with their children. And we should be looking at it from that perspective as well, because there are many children who are not progressing with adequate progress. And we have many children who have exceeded already the year's benchmark. And so for us to keep that in mind. So can we go on? Do you want me to go on now? The other thing, one last thing about this particular topic is in terms of school committee, what level of detail does school committee need? Not this level. So that was the main purpose of this, was just to dive in and give you more detail. But I don't think this is the level of detail we need to do for school committee. And we really need your feedback to know what is, so that there is an understanding of how we should present. Do you have any insight for us in that area?
We may have to think about it for a minute or two.
Okay.
We may
One
have to
thing that I think will come up is, of the kids who are in the red, how many are kids of color or low income? That question, if I had to guess, will come up.
Right. That's actually, I'm not as much worried about that as much as what level of detail, like should we go do a deep dive like we did? Or do we just present the numbers and how, and the issue and the ways in which we've addressed, you know, the culture change, the practice change, the ways we're addressing the teacher professional development, but also supporting students to meet or exceed benchmark.
So I'm thinking the composite, the one we spent some time on, but not each of the subtests. You know, that like one of the first ones we looked at, composite on first, second, kindergarten first and second, and maybe not only addressing the reds, but a little bit of addressing the blues. Like, what are we doing for those children who are already reading when they come in? I mean, I think the public would like to know what we're doing probably for each of those colors. You know, what kind of interventions, what kind of opportunities. I think that might be helpful to people.
Great. Would it be, is it outside of the purview of the subcommittee to share a preview of what that is for feedback before we go to school committee on March 30th?
To share it with who, Grace?
The three of you. Or just you?
No, you mean, yeah, you could do that if you want. I mean, what your presentation will be to the whole school committee.
Absolutely. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, because you don't want to be surprised when you get there. You want to address.
No, but I also want I want it to be comprehensive, but not 35 minutes,
right,
or 40 minutes, or whatever, however long we've spent on this, right?
Don't let us interrupt. Number one, say wait till we finish.
Well, but this is the place for that. So I think that, you know, that's okay. But I just want to be really cognizant of what the whole group and the community actually needs.
Sometimes we don't have it right. Stephen might have some ideas too.
Yeah, I would say the risk factors, how you consolidated those, that was interesting, and it will be interesting to the whole committee. And I think one level more detail than that is interesting too. That the bigger slide I think will be of interest, because a lot of the school improvement plans detailed some of the school specific tools that the principals had invested in for literacy education. So I think there's appetite at I think it's not just me that the whole school committee has for literacy education right now. So I think one more level of detail would be interesting. That's my impression.
Okay, thank you so much for that feedback. So the next part.
I'm sorry, one other piece of feedback is, where do we expect kids to be in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade? Because at one point with Lucy Cock, and I don't want to go back to that, you know, we expected all kids to read by the end of kindergarten. Well, that doesn't necessarily happen, you know, in a developmental way. You know, some kids don't. My kid didn't. He didn't read till middle of first grade, but you know, and believe me, he got a degree and he's fine. So, you know, what is our expectation? And like Suzanne said, what do we do for those kids who exceed the expectation? And obviously what we do with those kids who don't.
So even if a student, let's say in kindergarten, is exceeding the expectations, they might not be comprehending yet.
Yeah.
And so that would be the next level of instruction. And, you know, but that would be beyond the purpose of this screener. It would just be an indicator that, oh, this child is ready for more. And so that would mean looking at the standards and thinking about what those standards require of every grade level. So you asked a good question, which is what is expected of every grade? And I would tell you that we would go to the literacy, ELA and literacy framework to find out what is expected as minimum for our students in Brookline. And so, and you know, we know that students pretty much meet or exceed for the most part, but not all, but the minimum has to be those standards. That has not been communicated widely in the district. And so I think that is some work that the Office of Teaching and Learning needs to be doing across content areas, not just in ELA.
Okay.
And if I may add, we also look for growth. So, you know, alarms will go off for me even if a student is low, if the student is not making significant or adequate growth, even if they're still behind. As you said, each child is unique in their learning, and so
right. And we don't have and I know standardized testing is not a thing in Brookline, but we don't have SGP or growth until fourth grade on those standardized tests, but we can look at this M-class data to see whether or not students' growth is progressing and accelerating, because that would be the main goal, would be to accelerate their growth.
Okay, we could talk about this forever, couldn't we? Because
I
we
know.
all love literacy. I do too, as you know. So, but I'm going to move us along.
Yeah. So the next goal is to have, I'd like your feedbacks based on using this framework now from this data. As you know, or may not know, the district has been working with New Teacher Center in order to study the response to intervention and child study team process. And we've learned a lot from them in the last year. One of the things that in the last time they came for professional development with leaders and coordinators, they had us brainstorm what we thought our vision is for our TI/child study team. And so they used some documents to help them get started. And I used all of their charts to create one for Brookline, a draft. And I wanted to come here to this group to ask for your feedback to help us continue to refine it. I'd like you to take a look at it from the perspective of a non-educator, parent, or, you know, public, but also as an educator to see if you understand it, because so much of what we do is full of, you know, acronyms and and gobbledygook. So this was intended to be shorter than it is, but I wanted to make sure that it was comprehensible. And I'd like you to take at least, 5 minutes just to think about clarity, whether you understand it, and also are we on the right track? Because we don't have a consistent process across the district, and we don't also have a full suite of assessments to base our child study team meetings on yet. And so, that means our foundation for choosing students for support is very rocky, in my opinion. It's based on teacher, individual schools, individual classrooms and grade levels, not necessarily on a standard or measure. And so we're identifying students that might not truly need to be identified or need support. We don't really know whether how do we know what support they need? So I'm gonna just do you have access to the link? If you take, I don't know, 5 minutes, turn off your screen and just read it for clarity, understanding. And then I just love to hear feedback.
Where is this link? I don't know.
It is in the slides right after the data slides.
Okay.
I don't have the slides.
Was that what was sent out with the meeting?
Yes, it should be in the same document that you were looking at to look at the data.
Oh,
It's on slide 10. Feedback is on the left-hand side.
I'm sorry, but
Oh, okay.
when was this sent out? What date?
I think Betsy sent an email yesterday.
I'll send the new one. Michelle shared one just before the meeting, so I'm about to send it to you right now, so you'll have.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure, absolutely.
So we should look at that one and not the one in the slide.
Well, the link is the same. So let me see if I can find the link and I can just
Oh,
put it
I
in.
have it open. Do you want me to put it on the screen?
Yeah, can you just share that?
Is that okay? Okay. Let me just put it on the
I
screen.
also have. Oh, we have no chat, huh?
But then we can't move it, so it doesn't help really because we all have to read it the
that's-
same
There
place.
it goes. It's there.
That's the whole thing, right?
Oh, that's the whole thing?
That's the whole thing. So 5 minutes, I'm going to put on the clock.
Okay. So these two paragraphs you want feedback on? Is that what you're asking? Or it's when?
Yes, I just wanted to give everyone as much time as they need to get to process. So turn your cameras on if you're ready.
Oh. Cameras are on.
Okay, see.
Yeah, I think we're ready, Grace.
Yeah.
All right, I saw Steve there. So, okay, I'm happy to start taking your feedback.
Well, to me, this just defines the problem and defines the terms. And that's good because people need to know that.
Yeah, this feels like the preamble to me to then what it is that we're going to ask them to do. So then what does a child study team look like? And how does that happen?
So
Right.
one of the reasons why we actually the group wanted this, and what's interesting is although many of them said all of these very similar things, the action thoughts that they had about in terms of what they wanted to do didn't match. And so, you know, for example, talking about tier 1, but then we don't really, we don't all have the same tier 1 across the district necessarily. And so that's something I think that as a district, we need to grapple with. And I wanted to present this to you because RTI, we were supposed to implement in 2004. And so it's been almost 20 years, and we still don't have a system of support that's based on data for our students. You know, we're getting there. And I'm telling you that this is not uncommon across the state. There are many systems that still don't have a comprehensive assessment system, or, you know, follow up with the kinds of support that's targeted for students. But this is a beginning to try to get there, and to offer the proper support to the right students, and go from there.
So Grace, just tell us quickly, if you could, what happens now?
Great question. So our next step is to continue to work with NTC. What we're going to do, and you all can give us New Teacher Center. They're the ones that have been facilitating the professional development to collect information across the district on what our practices look like, and and help us move towards having a common understanding, because I don't think we had a common understanding of what a child study team. We have child study teams, but we don't necessarily have a common lens and practice to provide support to our students. And so, deep understanding of what that means. There's misconceptions about what the tiers meant, for example. Or there are misconceptions about whether, if I go to this meeting, I can immediately get a referral for an evaluation for this student, but it's not based on it's only really based on some subjective feelings of the teacher, not necessarily a standard or a measure. And so those are some of the things I think. So the next thing we're going to do to finish is to have NTC conduct some instructional reviews at our buildings to collect data on tier 1 instruction using a common lens. And so we'll provide schools with data on that, and also create a trend. What's the trend in Brookline? From there, we'll try to build what our tier 1, build a plan for what tier 1 is and looks like. And then that means a lot of learning for curriculum coordinators, principals, OTL, you know, special ed, every one of us, the teachers, students, and parents, in terms of what that means. And then at the same time, we need to create some common process that the schools use and common expectations, even though our foundation is rocky, and move towards one that's stronger. All right, questions from Helen and then Stephen.
Yeah.
So I'm a little confused. I read your piece. I think and I heard what you said at the beginning. Brookline looks great in terms of its reading, for instance, and compared to other districts and stuff like that. I understand we're doing this new teacher thing. I'm not exactly sure. I was precipitated, I assume, by the DESE stuff. But there's a disconnect here, in my opinion, because the DESE stuff is talking about a certain group of students who are either over-identified or under-identified. I'm not even sure, and I think it's both, if I had to guess. But yet we're redoing the whole system and putting a lot of effort into redoing the whole system. And I guess I'm confused why that's
What do you
happening.
mean whole system? Because we
Well,
don't
you're
have
saying,
one. we don't have a child study team process that's consistent across the district. And I would argue that our students that are getting harmed are our marginalized, traditionally marginalized groups. And they're the ones that could be getting over-identified and improperly supported. And
So
as a
they're getting
result,
the IEPs instead of getting the tier 1 instruction.
correct. And it's also, access to this tier 1 instruction for all kids. And some kids are going to do fine whether they get the tier 1 instruction. Actually, I would argue most of Brookline students will do fine even if they don't have the minimum tier 1 instruction.
Yeah, I agree.
We're not meeting the needs of all of our students, and that's a problem. And so,
and the child study teams also are supposed to deal with kids on all sides, right? Not just the kids who are, so the other end too probably doesn't get what they need, I imagine.
Well, you probably have hit the nail, definitely. But they're meeting the standard, meeting and exceeding, I should say. And I would argue that not all kids are getting as challenged as they should, as indicated by our growth data on MCAS. And so even if a student is proficient, their growth might have been very low. That just shows that they didn't actually grow as much as students like themselves across the state. And that's not how it should look in Brookline. Our growth data should be in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
I think if I can jump in just really quickly, I think one of the pieces that I don't want us to confuse is that M-class data that we just looked at right now is only for K-2.
Yeah, I'm aware.
And we have so many students where we don't have concrete data and we don't have a math assessment that's similar to the M-class, right? And so it's really hard for teachers who have real concerns, right, and experience real concerns about students. It's hard for them to bring anything concrete other than their experiences. And we know there's differences in instructional practice and curriculum across schools. And so part of the hope of the review is to get a good, clear sense from an external observer of like, what do we actually do? And so now that we have this, like, I don't think it's appropriate to say we're changing the whole system. We're considering what might need to be changed.
I guess if I could, and then I'll let Steve go, because you had asked for feedback on those 2 paragraphs. And I think for me, I wasn't clear what you wanted from that. So
I mean, I think that it's like, does the public know that we have child study team system in the district? And do we have a common understanding of what that is or what it should look like or the purpose of it in the district? And I think that needs to be really clear, and we have to have the same message across the board. And it can't just be left to individual schools and individual teams and teachers to decide what that is, because it could lead to students not being either mislabeled or students not being served as well as they should be.
So we have talked about at school committee child study teams. Have we done enough of it? Is it the right place even to be discussing it? Should it be discussed at PTO meetings where parents can understand what it is? Because they're the ones who are
Oh, I definitely think it's a school-based discussion, but it should, and that it's a practice that there should be policy, right? That students get the right support that they need, and that the vehicle for getting that support is through a solid assessment system and a solid child study team process. But, and that's it for school committee, but in terms of like how we operate and all of that, we need to be working that out in the system and make it a high quality system. Stephen?
Yeah, let's go to Stephen.
Yeah, so first of all, I think we've talked a lot about CSTs over the last year on the school committee. We've expressed a lot of optimism and enthusiasm about them. So I think to the extent that people are tuned in to education discourse in the town, they probably heard people talk about CSTs. My only feedback is that I think it might be useful to make the link between CSTs and how they mitigate disproportionalities more explicit, because I think we tend to talk about CSTs as not a silver bullet, but just like the answer to a lot. that more customized strategy of responding to student learning challenges. How that's applied to disproportionality isn't, I think, intuitive or necessarily immediately clear. So to draw that link more clearly, I think that would be helpful to the public.
Great, thank you so much.
Sure.
I just want to let Gabe know, we're still thinking of you, Gabe, because he has SITs at the high school. So it's kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah, I think for the context of this, it's functionally interchangeable, but we can probably include some clarification that the high school calls it SIT, but again, it's ideally the same.
But your data and your assessments would certainly not look like what we have in the early grades. So
yeah, it's a little bit different, right? We certainly don't have the level of like screening. MCAS is a little bit different because it's only 10th grade, right? So it's even more limited tool. In some departments and in certain classes, we have common assessments. So like 9th grade social studies has some common assessments that can be used, but that's certainly not universal across the high school.
So how does a kid get referred to for a student? Yeah.
Sometimes it's a couple teachers or like a guidance counselor or a dean may kind of raise the flag, but.
So there are data though, like grades and
Sure.
attendance, things like that could be red flags, like early warning indicators that can be used to kind of make sure that students are on track, to graduate. Those things are often used at high school as well. And I would suggest that grades be, run every quarter to see how kids are doing. I don't know enough yet about each school to know whether or not they do that process.
Are you talking for the high school or?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And even for
school,
6 through 8, run the grades every quarter and make sure that students are on track, or that if students aren't, how are they being supported? And that's something we could look at a district level as well, just to see how students are doing just using grades. But again, grades are inconsistent in each of the schools because their practices are inconsistent. So it's kind of hard to do at the district level in the 8 schools. Suzanne?
Yeah, do we keep track of data around child study teams or SITs? In other words, how many kids come up, what are the results from the meetings, how many go on to an IEP, how many go on to, identify, do we do,
I actually don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
We do not have a district level dashboard. The hope is that we've been talking with the new Aaron, Tam, who is now doing the data services, and he's actually working on a dashboard that will pull from like if people are putting things in Aspen, wherever they're putting them.
I mean, there could be some schools that tend to go to child study teams more than others, or it could be in some schools, they kind of bypass child study team and they go straight to special ed referral. I mean, I don't know that that's the case, but it would be nice to kind of know what that data might look like as a baseline. If we are going to look to make some changes, there's certainly a cultural change in the system, just something to think about, something more to worry about.
So
Okay.
that's thank you for your feedback and patience. I mean, we're going to continue to update you on how we're growing and progressing and becoming more systematic.
I think again, maybe just walking through a case study, not today, but some, like if I'm a teacher, I have this child, I'm worried about the child, how long does it take me to get a child study team meeting? What do I have to present? What are possible outcomes from that? Why is that? Why we're having this disproportionality in terms of marginal groups? Because they aren't coming to study team, or they are coming to study. There's just a lot of questions here. So yeah, it's good work. So thank you. Thank you for doing that. Okay, we're moving along. I know this is a pretty fast pace. Maybe we're a little ambitious this meeting. Do you want to just tell a little bit about enrichment? The idea with enrichment was not that we were going to solve that, but that we might just start framing it. Again, you're going to have a presentation coming up in March to the larger.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to satisfy the need of the school committee. So getting your feedback would be really appreciated. So what I did was, being new to Brookline, it's kind of a blessing to be able to say that sometimes, and I'll probably be able to say that the whole 6 months. So, but I notice that students in Brookline receive a lot of required unified arts, which I consider are non-core academic subjects. And so that's one way I thought I can say 100% of our students receive. So one of the ways that I framed enrichment, and which may not be the way school committee wants to hear it, is that every student gets world language, every student gets art, music, and I can show you what they get. Would you like to see that slide?
Wait a minute, why do we define enrichment?
Yeah.
Because we may have different ideas of what.
Yeah, for me, enrichment is, as far as the school is concerned for right now, especially if our tier 1 is not consistent across the board, enrichment is all the non-core subjects.
In K through 8, you're talking.
K through 8.
Okay.
That's for me, but remember where I've been. I've been in Boston and Framingham and Lowell. Those are my last 3 stints. Westford was completely different, although I don't remember offering anything more than 1 art, music, PE, and library a week. So, Brookline, at least back then when I was in Westford from 95 until 95 or 95 to 2005, that's all kids got was a library, art, music, and PE. Right. Okay. And so for me, seeing world language and 2 musics and, all these other things is astounding. And especially because that leaves about 3.5 hours of the day for non-core subjects. So for me, that means, when you want enrichment, what does that mean? You want this in the 6.5 hours that students are in school. They've already only got 3.5 hours for the tier 1 instruction that I think needs to be more rigorous.
So I would guess that some people would say enrichment goes beyond that. They would talk about enrichment within the core subjects.
Mm-hmm.
So things like
more depth, more breadth.
More depth, more breadth. Yeah.
Okay. And can I just be devil's advocate and just say that our tier 1 then, since it's inconsistent and varies across, and we only have 3.5 hours a day, less on Friday. If that's the case, something has to give, but we need to make sure that we have a solid tier 1. And I would argue that our tier 1 is not as rigorous as what is cited in our standards, in the Massachusetts state standards, and that there's not enough time to fulfill those Massachusetts standards in the 3.5 hours that the students have every day. So if you want that, something has to happen in your schedule. And I don't think in my 6 months, I'm going to change that culture. But I can bring up the issue that I see based on my experience and share that, a lot of time in the day is for non-core subjects, and something had to be given up. And but most of it was science and social studies.
Helen, nice job raising your hand.
Education, yes, you can. I mean, the core subjects are important. They should be taught in ways that, social studies and English are taught together so that you get the English. But these other, what you call, I don't know what you call them.
Non-core.
Non-core subjects are some of the subjects that kids love the most and get a lot out of and can be used to also enhance some of that other rigor. I mean, that's what Boston is trying to go back to, is to get music and phys ed and some of that into the schools. Kids need to enjoy what they're doing in addition to, you know, and you can enjoy the core subjects too. It's not that you can't. But I think it needs, I mean, I remember
I would argue that students would enjoy the core subjects more if they were more rigorous, and that parents would be happier as well.
Yes. However, I think you want a well-rounded child. I don't think you want, I mean, I want a kid who understands music, may not be the music giant, but at least knows that, who can speak a second language, because that sometimes enhances other ways of I'm going to go on a soapbox here. This is not good. I mean, I remember when my kids went to school here, they had industrial arts, K through 8, industrial arts. You know, they had home ec, which, okay, we didn't have to have, you know, we had to cut at one point music in the 4th grade, and parents went crazy, and they were right, because, you know, the song flute and stuff, that it starts to get kids interested in things. I think, I don't know, obviously my perspective is that those are important too.
I agree with you. And if you read the curriculum frameworks, they argue that they want a well-rounded curriculum also.
Okay.
I think everyone wants the same thing, but I think have to make decisions about the amount of time that is devoted if we expect to, you know, because to me, literacy is number one. Like, you have got to be able to read, write, think, speak and listen and discern, argue and debate, and read complex text and be able to decipher that. And if you can't, I don't care how well-rounded you are, that it's, you know, maybe you'll go and do something else, but you're not going to be, you know, you're not going to be able to contribute to some of the most difficult, challenging jobs and problems in this world that we have today. And so, if we can't get that right in Brookline, then I don't know where we can get it right. Stephen.
Grace, my opinions aside, I would love for you to present that observation of yours to the full school committee. I think that's a really gutsy reflection. And I think that's the kind of conversation that will be really refreshing to have. Sorry, I do. I mean, I think the conversation about rigor and about how to achieve the right balance, opinions of the individual members of this community side, including myself, I would find it really interesting to have that conversation on the full school committee. With full respect to you, Helen, and to my own opinions. I would just love to hear that fully aired out.
Oh, I don't know. I guess I have nothing to lose, right? And which allows me to be able to, but I would do that whether I had anything to lose or not. This is who you get. If you have me as your deputy of teaching and learning, then these are the things that I need to bring up to your community. But in order to get to some change that we all might not agree on, but I think actually is really important for our 9th graders.
I feel like, however interim you may be, having your reflections about what you perceived in the period of time that you're in Brookline would be really valuable for the full school committee. Like having a level deeper than like the subdomain reports that OTL delivers with the curriculum subcommittee. That's really important to me. And that seems like one of those like core insights that could stimulate a really, really refreshing conversation, I think.
Stephen, I think there's one thing I need to do first, which is do the NTC walkthroughs and have actual data, because my time in the buildings has been really limited. And, you know, I've worked and so I don't want to, you know, alienate the school principals or the coordinators, because, it can feel really, they would need to hear this first before it becomes like a public conversation. But I'd like to back it up with some data from NTC. I could be completely wrong. Tier 1 could be stellar, and so I want that data first before I make that claim to the school committee. Is that fair?
And it's totally
Oh,
fair.
I think it's critical
Okay.
because I think you'll get slaughtered otherwise.
I do too, which is why I kind of thought, no, that's not the right place right now, at least not yet. Not yet.
Gabe, you want to give your hand up?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to make a bit of a preview and connection because in a couple of weeks, the folks who did the middle school review will be presenting their full report to the school committee. And we're going to see similar things at the middle school level about time on learning and what our day looks like and how we use our day. And, we've heard similar conversation about time on learning for science and social studies in K-5, right? And as social studies coordinator, I worked with plenty of teachers who had trouble feeling like they could implement the full curriculum and even a full pared down curriculum, frankly. And so I think some of the things that will arise and some of the things we know about how, we added world language, but did not add time in the day. So that time came from somewhere, right? And it just did. And whether that's the choice we want to make or whether that's a choice we want to revise is a different question, but it did come from somewhere. And when we lengthened the day for teacher collaboration time, it didn't lengthen the student day, right? Over the course of a week, like students got the same time on learning, even though we extended the school day for educators. And so I think these are some of the questions that in some cases, many years later, are worth looking at again and worth considering. And there are pieces that we might be able to do or we might want to do that we could make some different decisions about. And so I think a little bit to Stephen's point, like between the middle school review, between this work, like we're starting to have the information we need to have that conversation in a fact-based and evidence-based way and not just our opinions.
That's true. That's true. I forgot about that. Good point.
And I think it goes along with what Stephen was talking about before with like literacy, because if we have 3.5 hours in a day to do literacy, math, science, social studies, and to do some social emotional learning, we make those choices. And so one of the things that we've done, and I think we presented this to you last year, was just do a very quick straw man poll of the K-5 time on learning, and realize that like the amount of time that a school can structure into their day for literacy specifically was not necessarily the recommended amount of time that we would make for literacy. So I think all of this goes together when we're thinking about tier 1 instruction.
Okay, so I know Helen has a lot to say still, and I get that.
Shut
Helen.
up. I'm going to shut up.
No, not that. It's not that. It's just that we actually need to close the meeting, which is really hard because we're having a really good discussion. So Grace, I think, you know what, I would not worry about that date that you have for the enrichment conversation if you are not ready for it. Okay, you can either bring it back to us here at the subcommittee if you want more conversation about it before you go to the whole committee, or you could just push it back with the whole committee if you're not quite ready for that.
So but Linus, Dr. Guillory is the person who wants this on the docket.
I mean, we can talk to him. You can talk to him.
Okay.
I can talk to him about it. Docket is just, we push things back and sometimes we push things forward. If you're prepared and you want to do it, that's fine. But I'm just saying, if you're feeling like you don't have what you need in terms of either data or just anecdotal even, then,
But I mean, is the enrichment conversation actually about the tension that is,
we're just starting to hear about it from a few members of the public. It seems to be coming mostly from one school, but that doesn't mean it's not a consideration to have. It's just that we've heard it a couple of times now, and so people said maybe we should bring it to the whole committee and talk about it. And we can still do that, but I'm just suggesting that if you help us decide what the right timing is on that.
Okay, I will.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can see this brings up so many feelings, and you know, we've got those of us who our kids have already been through and we think it turned out to be a great program. And you know, so I mean, there's some things about Brookline schools that make them Brookline schools, right? And so we want to be careful that we hold on to what's important and not just throw everything out.
I think the thing, Suzanne, that, you know, I think we really, which is about the disproportionality and students who are not being served. Like I'm always, you know, even in Westford where students did phenomenal, my kids were, you know, they did phenomenally well, you know, but there were kids who didn't. Those were the kids that I worried about every day and couldn't sleep.
Right.
And so I get you, I understand, but I also know that if a kid isn't getting what they need, then, you know, there's a huge percentage of families in Brookline who'll get what that child needs. But I have to stay awake at night thinking about the ones that aren't getting their needs met. And I actually think that more kids can get their needs met if we had stronger programs.
Okay, that's absolutely fair. I mean, I think that's what we want to hear about. That's, you know, what we want to know. So, I mean, we look forward to the discussion either here or in the whole committee. I'm just suggesting if you're not ready by that March date, ask for an extension, that's all. And if
Great, thank you. Thanks for the permission.
Yeah. I don't know about that, but I can put a
I
vote.
want to be a good doobie.
Prime time.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
I think any new business, just for a moment? No? Okay, we're gonna call it
A good one.
tonight because I have negotiations at 6. So
Okay, I was wondering what was on next, and I said, gee, I know I don't have another.
not
meeting.
you, I'm on, you're off, Helen. So anyway, thank you everyone very much for for these many discussions. I think we covered a lot of ground. Grace, I just would like to say thank you. You seem to have a handle on a lot of things going on in town in such a short time. So probably thanks to Michelle and Gabe, they probably helped you with that.
They are great. They're taking care of me very well. I
good,
appreciate them both.
I am impressed that you somehow hit the ground running, and that's great. You know, you're not just babysitting us during this interim. You're pushing us, and so thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's what I think the job is, so that's fun for me to do.
Not everybody would do it as well, so thank you for sharing so much of what your expertise is. With that last word, if there's no other last words, I'm going to call it an evening and say thank you to the team here, and have a good evening. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.